Hello, I'm Do Coyle, and in this short presentation I want to take a brief look at the development of Content and Language Integrated Learning, or CLIL, as a pedagogic concept. We are living in times of very rapid change. CLIL too has shifted from its earlier days of investigating potential learning gains, where subject learning or thematic studies and languages are successfully brought together, to more recently supporting a Pluriliteracies approach. A Pluriliteracies approach is one where integrated learning in the broader sense can impact on any learning across any language, be it a first, second, foreign or other language. When the European Centre for Modern Languages, ECML, funded a team to work on Pluriliteracies and CLIL in 2013, the early phase of working with Oliver Meyer, Anna Halbach, Theresa Ting and Kevin Schuck soon developed into the Gratz Group. The Gratz Group is developing a new and evolving model for Pluriliteracies in CLIL. I would therefore like to share with other CLIL professionals how our Pluriliteracies approach is rooted in the 4 Cs, and therefore enables teachers, teacher educators and researchers to conceptualize and reconceptualize their practices in the light of deepening understanding. I shall now explore this further. I would like to begin by revisiting the 4 Cs framework. The 4 Cs framework was developed in the 1990s after working constantly with groups of teachers and teacher educators, especially my colleague Philip Hood at the University of Nottingham, and researchers across Europe. The aim was to provide a tool which foregrounds the fundamental elements of CLIL. The 4 Cs, as they are now commonly called, are used widely across the globe to raise awareness of the components of CLIL and to support teachers in their CLIL planning. It highlights the needs for teachers to not only focus on content and language, but also on the dynamic aspects of integrated learning, without which neither language progression nor knowledge construction can happen effectively. The 4 Cs framework is based on the principle that strengthening and deepening a learner's conceptual understanding requires social, cultural, linguistic and cognitive processes. The components are content, cognition, communication and culture. The first C is the C for content. Content is the subject or theme which ranges from subject disciplines such as science or geography to cross-disciplinary themes such as global citizenship or sustainability, which can be led by any teacher. It is important to note that content in the broadest sense may range from topics and themes which language teachers wish to work with in their classes to those which the subject teacher must cover as part of the syllabus. Content can be worked on at any age and stage. Critically, content learning involves meeting and understanding different kinds of new knowledge, including concepts, facts, procedures, so that learners can apply their knowledge to problem solving, discussion or further development. The second C, for cognition, requires learners to process information and engage with it in order to make meaning. Constructing meaning involves individual learners in applying and strategically using existing and new knowledge to solve problems and carry out tasks related to the subject or theme. It also involves learners in cognitive challenge through higher order thinking, for example, as set out in Bloom's taxonomy. We know that content is not about the rote learning of facts, but that content is all about how learners can engage with it in different creative and challenging ways so that the new knowledge can be internalized. The third C is communication, and perhaps one which is the most interesting. It focuses on the language which is needed to construct knowledge. It cements content and cognition, since language is needed by individuals to share and demonstrate understanding both externally and internally. Communication involves both language learning, that is, acquiring the language needed to learn the subject or theme, and language using, that is, using language to articulate understanding and thereby engage in learning processes. Communication is part of any learning, be it through a foreign first or second language. The language triptych provides us with a useful reminder that creating the necessary conditions for learning is needed in order to enable learners to access the different types of language: language of learning, language for learning, and language through learning. Language of learning is the language closely related to the content, such as key vocabulary, expressions, and terminology. Language for learning is the language learners need to process and operationalize their understanding in the classroom, such as how to work in a group or write a report. And language through learning is the language that emerges and is needed by individual learners to deepen and internalize their learning. New learning requires new language, determined by the learner, not the teacher. The fourth C, culture, has two interrelated strands. First, at the macro level, culture encompasses making transparent societal values and cultures embedded in home and other contexts. Culture is the filter through which individuals interpret their world. CLIL requires learners to develop intercultural understanding, which impacts on all the other Cs. Second, at the micro level, in CLIL, each subject discipline or related theme has its own culture, with its own content and ways of communicating and interpreting the world. These subject-specific norms impact on the way in which content is conceptualized and the kind of discourse functions used to support these processes. It requires learners to think and act like a scientist or like a geographer or like a global citizen. The 4Cs framework is therefore a conceptual framework. It is a useful aide-memoire for planning and conceptualizing CLIL programs for learning to be successful and connected. It provides a useful tool and springboard. So what about integrated learning beyond the 4Cs? The 4Cs was developed to draw attention to integrating elements of learning, which go beyond content and language. The 4Cs encourage us to conceptualize CLIL holistically, but it doesn't tell us how to integrate learning over time. The Gratz Group has been working with colleagues in the field to develop a new understanding of the interconnectedness of the elements of CLIL. The group seeks to provide guidance about how integrated learning can lead to progression over time as it happens in reality in classrooms. I shall start with an obvious statement. Content only becomes meaningful when it is understood or conceptualized. Conceptualization requires language to be used appropriately, since it is through language that understanding is made visible. But what do we mean by made visible? This happens when learners put into their own words what they've learned. This articulation, or to use Swain's term, languaging, requires not just any language, but language which relates to subject cultures and disciplines. However, when concepts are linked to specific subject tasks and activities, this languaging, or explaining learning, requires language which is specific to the cognitive discourse functions of the subject discipline, for example, classifying, explaining, describing, justifying, in order to make thinking visible. Each discourse function takes on a different shape, depending on the context and subject discipline. In order to progress, learners have to learn how to adapt these discourse functions to different subject cultures. Therefore, meaning-making, which involves knowing, which is the content, and thinking, which is cognition, only becomes visible when discourse functions are articulated well, that is, through communication. Learner progression is about individuals becoming increasingly skilled in purposeful communication across cultures and languages, using the appropriate style, mode, and genre typical of their subject and their audience. That is, they will have to develop subject literacies across languages, known as pluriliteracies. Throughout schooling, the quality of this communication needs to become increasingly interculturally aware and subject appropriate, and this is the culture. In other words, we cannot separate one C from another. So, what is the pathway from subject literacies to pluriliteracies? Subject literacies have to be developed through schooling across disciplines and languages. Whilst this may appear a given, it does not automatically happen because the development of learners' subject literacies is not usually prioritised either by subject teachers or language teachers. Fundamentally, it requires learning to be conceptualised as progression along knowledge pathways in order to increase learners' meaning-making potential and lead them further into deeper learning of subject disciplines. Starting with basic literacies in any language, learners move increasingly towards subject-specific literacies, broadening the range of text types through which they express their knowledge and understanding. In order to do this, learners must become familiar with a range of genres. They have to learn how to communicate their understanding at deeper levels, in different styles and for different purposes. This in turn requires the use of appropriate subject-specific modes, such as spoken and written text, visual and graphic representations. These principles form the basis of our Pluriliteracies model. The model takes individual components related to the 4Cs framework and demonstrates how an integrated approach requires a shift in how we conceptualise learning in CLIL classrooms. It focuses on the development of subject or academic literacies. It draws on integrating conceptual development and linguistic progression through a range of social, linguistic, communication and cultural processes discussed previously. Our model therefore eliminates the content-language divide. Placing Pluriliteracies development at the centre of learning challenges teachers to focus on subject-specific task performance if their learners are to actively engage in subject-specific discourses. Anna Halbach, a member of the Graz group, has created a YouTube video where she explains in greater detail the Pluriliteracies model, so do take a look. Finally, I would like to underline the fundamental need for learner progression in CLIL to be made more transparent. The Pluriliteracies model focuses on meaning making. Learner progression happens through strengthening the connections between two continua, the conceptualizing continuum and the communicating continuum. As a subcategory along the communicating continuum, mode stresses the need for teachers to enable their learners to understand, critically reflect upon, and create multimodal messages, essential for operating successfully in current contexts. Novices move outwards through the pluriliteracy arc in the model. Pluriliterate experts are sensitive to the social and cultural context and can position themselves inside the two axes of the continua. This involves learners in responding appropriately to the demands of a given task. In other words, it requires them to adapt their language to specific purpose, modes, and audiences in order to communicate their understanding and construct meaningful social interactions. The Pluriliteracies model provides a means of visually mapping progression in literacies over time across languages, subjects, and contexts. The model fundamentally challenges the relation between content and language, which has dominated the CLIL discussions during the last 2 decades. In simple terms, by working on the language, learners refine their understanding, and by increasing their understanding, they also become able to express their knowledge in more appropriate and sophisticated terms. Language and content, therefore, determine each other. The model suggests that defining levels of subject literacies may become possible. This will fundamentally change the ways in which learning is assessed in CLIL contexts in the future. The model also bridges learning across languages by integrating learning and transfer through a foreign or second language with mother tongue learning. All learning, whatever the language, can benefit from this approach. The Graz group hopes that through constructing the model, there is a transparent pathway for progression where language and language awareness can, and profitably ought to be, developed into a whole school approach to learning, cutting across languages and subject boundaries and promoting pluriliterate citizens. We are looking forward to collecting case studies from teachers who are working with the model. What we do know is that for CLIL to be sustainable and successful, then it has to be dynamic. We hope the Pluriliteracies model provides a useful trigger for future thinking.